Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Buy, Sell, or Hold, a guide to buying or selling your business. Thank you for joining us today, and we're in for a great session. I'm going to ask the other speakers, maybe if we can all go on mute. I don't know if I'm hearing a bit of an echo. Thank you. That's great. All right. Thank you for joining us today for our Lunch and Learn session. This is session 1, Is Now the Right Time to Sell? It's hard work to build a business. You've invested your life work in creating a product, in growing relationships with your customers, with your employees, and with your suppliers. And the last 6 months has really caused every business owner to be thinking and rethinking every aspect of their business. At some point, every owner starts to think about what's next for my business. Do I sell? Is now the right time? Do I hold? Do I buy? And selling a business is not something, or buying a business is not something most owners do regularly. In fact, 5% of middle market companies are sold or merged each year, and 46% of those only have done it for the first time. So regardless of where you are in the process, even if you're not ready to make a move, it's valuable to know how the process works. And this 7-part seminar series that we have organized is really designed to give you a roadmap to take you through the process from thinking through and getting ready to and answering the question, is now the right time to sell, to engaging buyers and finding the right one, to handing over the keys. These sessions address questions such as, is now the right time to sell? How do I find the right buyer? What's my business worth? What are buyers going to be looking for? Am I ready to sell? Am I ready for due diligence? Do I have my own dream team supporting me? What's the right deal structure and terms? And what can I expect at closing? These events are scheduled bi-weekly throughout the rest of the year, except in December where they become weekly. And you can register for these at the email below, and the email address will also be in the chat box. This program is brought to you by the Mergers, Acquisitions, and Transactions Roundtable of the USA 500 Club. The program is not intended to be legal, accounting, tax, financial, or other types of business advice. The information and opinions that are offered here today and comments are educational in purpose and represent those of the individuals, not of their organizations or anyone else. As you go through your own personal journey, we encourage you to work with your own professionals to seek advice on what is best for you and your business situation. And now, I'd like to first, before we start, I'd like to thank Markham for hosting the webinar series and for providing the webinar platform to help us deliver this roadmap to you. And now I'd like to introduce today's panel. I'm Janine Buis, and I'm the moderator for today's session. I am the president and co-founder of GrowthTerra, a growth advisory firm that helps B2B companies grow and scale. I've spent my career working in technology, from startups to large global corporations like Nokia, as a consultant and as an operator. I help sales, marketing, customer success teams achieve record revenue growth, increase customer retention and satisfaction. In addition to helping companies prepare for a transaction, I also help buyers integrate transactions and capture the value, ranging in deals from startups to multi-billion-dollar acquisitions. And I started my career at Arthur Andersen and Deloitte. Next, we have Larry Thal. Larry is a partner with Acela Benefit Specialists. Larry helps companies to maximize the financial benefit from medical and insurance plans for all stakeholders, from owner-managers to each employee. He's had a long and successful career in insurance and financial services, working at leading companies such as Equitable Life Insurance Society, AXA, and Prudential Insurance of America. And very important for today, Larry was the president and co-founder of Millennium Financial. He was there for 23 years before he sold that company to Acela Partners a couple of years ago. There he knows his stuff and provides continuing education to to the New York State Society of CPAs, as well as to the public, and has held leadership positions with the National Association of Insurance and Financial Advisors, as well as the National Association of Health Underwriters. And he's active in the Business Council of Westchester and Estate Planning Council of Westchester. Keith D is the president of Osage Advisors. Keith has more than 30 years of experience advising business owners and families of mid-sized companies, helping them to maximize the value through M&A and capital transactions. Over the course of his career, Keith has been a partner of a CPA firm, and he's run several privately held businesses. This unique combination of financial and operating experience gives Keith the ability to understand and meet the goals and objectives of clients. He's worked in a variety of industries, including manufacturing, business services, IT, healthcare, and distribution. And Keith holds the Series 7 and 63 registrations as a representative of Still Point Capital, LLC, member of FINRA and SIPC. Scott Mottner is a corporate M&A attorney and startup attorney with Harrington Occo Monk. Scott also has almost 30 years of legal and business expertise. He provides corporate, commercial, real estate, transactional, and general counsel services to startup and middle market companies. He regularly helps his clients in angel, seed, and venture capital equity and debt rounds, and in buy-sell M&A transactions ranging from size of $500,000 to $40 million. He's also served as the general counsel previously of a 3D technology company, a Spanish language newspaper, online media company, and a telecom company, and an online securities dealer broker, where he's completed equity and debt financing and M&A transactions worth about $700 million. And last but not least, Mary Greco is a partner with Olshan, Fromm, and Wolowski. And Mary's going to be co-moderator with me today. Thank you, Mary. Mary's practice focuses on assisting clients with the development, management, and protection of their brands in connection with Mary has represented clients on both the buyer and the seller side, performing due diligence and readying businesses for purchase or sale in small transactions, up to over $500 million deals. She's written and published articles on topics including brand development, intellectual property, the use of intellectual property in social media, marketing, and data privacy issues. Thank you all. We have an outstanding panel to talk about our topic today. Before we just get started, a couple of housekeeping items. Everyone is on mute. There's a button at the top right-hand corner of your screen where you can decide how you want to view the speakers. And there will be lots of time for questions. So we do encourage you to use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions, and we'll be checking those throughout the program. You can also use the chat box. And in case you're wondering, the session will be recorded and we will be sending out the link in the coming days. So let's get started. As I said, it takes years to build your business. Selling it is a big decision, not just a financial one, but an emotional one. You want to get the best buyer and the best outcomes that you can. In order to do that, there's a number of things that an owner needs to think about as they consider the process and consider whether now is the right time to sell. We're going to answer questions today, such as what are the motivations of sellers, buyers? Is my business ready to sell? What do I need to think about for valuation? What happens to my employees? And what are the alternatives to sell? We're going to start with a brief presentation from the panelists to get the conversation going and get you thinking about what are some of these key considerations. And we'll be taking questions. So Keith, over to you. One of the first things a seller needs to think about is personally, internally, why do I want to sell? So what does a seller go through? And why is it important that they do this?
Well, thank you, Janine. And everybody, thank you for attending today's webinar. So understanding and determining what's motivating the sale is a key first step. It sets the stage for all subsequent events when you're selling a business. So, what are typical reasons, owners looking to sell? One obviously is retirement. Someone who's worked, 10, 20, 30 years in their business wants to enjoy the fruits of the labor. They may have their spouse may have retired. and they want to spend some time together, traveling, whatever. Obviously, that's a little bit difficult in these environments. Or their friends retired, so they want to just kind of move on with their life, and that's typically the number one reason owners looking to sell. Other items that fall into this are personal considerations, and those are it could be things like conflicts with their partners. That could be a mother son, a father daughter, two brothers, etc. And ways to grow the business or move the business forward. You want to maintain it as it is. Your partner wants to grow it and spend a lot of money. So at that point, maybe it's the best to separate, sell the company to a third party and move on. It could be health issues, and not necessarily your own. You may have a spouse. We had a situation where a company we sold last year where the owner was in his early 70s. He was in great shape. He loved what he was doing, but his spouse had some significant health problems, and he really wanted to be with her. And so he was spending most of his attention, obviously on the home front, caring for his spouse, which got him to the belief that now's the time to sell. It could be that the next generation is not interested. The kids, whether it be in the current environment we're in, or the Great Recession of 2008, or they just don't want to do this. They don't have the same passion you do. So when you're a first or second generation looking to transfer down to the third generation, they may not have an interest. You may have sent the kids to college. They could be an engineer. They could be a doctor, a lawyer. So they want to move forward with their own profession and go their own path. That could be a reason. It could be, unfortunately, a death. We're involved in a situation right now where one of the owners unfortunately passed away, and the heirs of that they want their check, right? And then you're a privately held company. You don't have the cash flow to pay them out, and that could be a reason to why you're selling the business. It could be financial. I mean, it could be an industry that's in high regard now. That a lot of buyers out there are aggressively pursuing, and they're playing a very strong multiple. And then even in today's environment, COVID-19, the pandemic, there are certain industries which are getting a lot of attention, and the multiples are high. So it may be, timing, right? When's the right time to sell? I mean, if you ask me a year ago, we had conversations with business owners over a year ago, and the good time to sell was in the first quarter of 2019. Valuations were high, plenty of money on the table, lots of buyers, interest rates were low, but the timing wasn't right. But here we are today. There's still a number of industries where you can get that high valuation and good time to cash out. Industry challenges and changes. You could be seeing a lot of consolidation within your industry. A lot of your peer could have sold. For example, aerospace. That's been an industry that's consolidated significantly over the years. And so people that you've done business with are no longer there. And so you don't have the same enjoyment you used to have out of it. So it could be a negative outlook. You could be looking at the challenges today obviously are with the pandemic. How am I going to move forward with my company? What's the best way to do that? Either selling your business or selling a part of your business or partnering with somebody that will take some of the burden off your back so you can focus on the key issues and have that partner focus on the infrastructure, on the cash flow, on the growth equity. That could be a way of transitioning out. And then, we always throw in this risk reward. I mean, especially for older business owners. The investment needed to be competitive in this marketplace. Or any marketplace with your competition, that reinvestment, new investment, new machinery, if you're in manufacturing, or personnel, or systems, whatever. Am I going to see the return on investment in my lifetime? Does it make sense for me at the age I'm at, whether you're 60 or 65 or 70, 75, to sign on to a personal guarantee with a bank when I'm not sure, what the payback's going to be? These are all reasons that fall into the consideration from business owners and their families, frankly, looking to sell. And which one of these, or multiple, it could be multiple aspects of the things we talked about here, are considerations to think about. Because those are the things that are going to set the stage, like I said earlier, for the next steps of the process.
Thank you, Keith. Yes, there's a lot. So there's a lot to think about personally and for the business as you're thinking about selling. And that's one side of the coin. I think it's also important as you're thinking about selling, to understand what the buyer might be looking for as you're thinking about what you want, thinking about what the buyer might be looking for so you can sort of match those. Do you want to talk a little bit about why would a buyer be interested in a seller company?
Sure. Well, thanks again. So, obviously you want to find the right buyer that understands, that offers the value proposition that makes sense to you as a seller. And that value is not just in the price. It's the legacy of the firm. It's the culture created. It's taking care of your employees. All those things factor into the decision-making process. But from a buyer perspective, it's really about, it's about growth. They could be in a mature market where they're looking to expand outside of their core business to grow the business, and they feel that the way to do that is through an acquisition. So they want to acquire a company that, therefore, growing their revenues, expanding their customer base, increasing their territories, etc. That is the number one reason your buyers, and it depends on the buyer, whether it's a strategic buyer. Let me give you an example. We recently covered a new product. We sold a company last year where they had no presence in the U.S. And the only way they felt, the best way they felt to open up a presence in the U.S. was to buy a U.S. company and grow the market. And they had some good products, but they had no service people, they had no knowledge, they had no industry, they had no brand here. And so the best way for them versus opening up a location and expanding was to buy a business that had a long history in the industry that they could acquire and then grow, not just grow the business here in the US, but also take the technology that this client had, the seller, and use that and build that through their pipeline over in Europe. So that's usually the number one reason the buyer's motivated. It could be a new product, again, as I said, market. For example, they may look at, you have a product line that's synergistic with their offerings. They have contacts and they have salespeople, they have infrastructure in place to market that business, to market those products synergistically with their current offerings. So they feel that they can ramp up the sales, so to speak. That would be advantageous to their growth plan. Clearly, acquiring talent. It's been having capacity, having people has been a challenge in every industry, even in the pandemic. Finding good, high qualified people that understand what you do, whether it's on the manufacturing floor, whether it's engineering, whether it's sales, up and down the line. If you can acquire the right talent to help grow your business, that's a consideration that buyers are looking for. It's a key consideration in the fact that they're looking for the management team to stay with the company in both aspects. So they find a talented management team that has been able to grow a business over time, and even maintain your business or grow the business in this current market. That's going to be a big attraction to them. You could have some IP, certain patents, intangibles, customer lists, vendor codes, et cetera, that they are not tapped into. You could have a vendor code with, trying to get a vendor code with a company like UTC or Lockheed Martin is challenging. And if you have that vendor code and they can acquire you and get that vendor code, that creates opportunity and more sales opportunities. Increased capacity. Trying to build a new plant in this environment, any environment is challenging. If you're working at 65 capacity in one shift and they can bring business to your plant and they can go and ramp up from one shift to two shifts and increase their capacity, that's a big win-win for them. Of course, eliminating competition. You could have been a thorn in their side that they have been trying. You have processes in place, you have techniques in place, you have ways of doing things that are more efficient more profitable, and they've never able to get into a certain market or certain customer because of the fact that they can't beat your price, or if they try to match your price, they're not going to make any money. So if they can take you out of the market and you become part of them, again, that's an incentive for the buyer to move forward.
Great. Yes, I think that's right. I've seen all of these. I think it's really important to understand these as a seller, understanding what the buyer and finding the right buyers, understanding what their motivations are. In fact, they all do, as you said in the beginning, boil down to growth. And again, the numbers, sort of, if you look at the mid-market numbers, they're saying 60% of the companies in the mid-market research say M&A is a key driver of their growth, and they expect it to contribute up to 26% of growth. So that's really one of the key things to understand how you can help your buyer grow. So knowing what the motivations, your own personal motivations are, and what you're hoping to do, and why you're looking at this as a potential way forward, and understanding your buyers is one thing. The next thing is really thinking about the business, and is the business ready to sell? And there's a number of considerations that you need to go through, and sort of thinking through, is the business ready to sell? Scott, do you want to talk a little bit about those? Scott?
Sorry, I thought I unmuted. Good morning, everyone. So what I was saying is buyers are definitely looking for clean businesses as they move forward. And depending upon who your buyer is, whether it's a strategic buyer who you might know, or potentially a private equity firm backed portfolio company, they have to meet obligations of investors and other interest groups. So if you look at this chart on your screen, there's a bunch of different ways I think about it when we're selling businesses for my clients. First thing to think about, and a lot of this goes to the fact that you want to have, as you're running your business, ongoing procedures and policies in place to make sure that you're complying with these different sort of thoughts and ideals. And so the first place is obviously corporate housekeeping. If you're a corporation or an LLC with a number of members or shareholders, you certainly want to have appropriate agreements in place where, if you're a majority shareholder, you can drag along the minorities and you can force them to sell alongside of you. You also want to have conflict resolution provisions in your documents to make sure, as Keith said earlier, if there becomes a conflict between partners, you're able to sell the business. There's a lot of instances where people get into conflicts and the agreements simply don't provide for any way to force the sale of the business. Obviously, as you're running the business, you want to maintain your shareholder agreements and things like that. Buyers, typically portfolio company buyers especially, look at their financial statements and expect GAAP or some level of professionalism on the financial statements. So if you're not keeping GAAP related or certified financial statements and you intend to sell your business in the next 6 months to a year, you need to start thinking about spending them, talking to your accounting firm about getting those financial statements updated and approved and reviewed, and make sure that they're all sort of matching your books and records. You also may want to think about, and Keith can talk about this a little bit more, quality of earnings reviews and things like that. When you're getting up into big mid-market numbers, private equity firms are certainly going to be looking at quality of earnings and making sure that your earnings are going forward. The other areas with customer agreements, supplier agreements, and those types of other related agreements, you're always going to want the ability to assign your contracts in connection with the sale of your business. A lot of people don't think about this, but when it comes time to sell, you may have major customers of yours that have no assignment clauses in your business, and then you need to go back to them to get permission to transfer their contracts. And it becomes a major problem sometimes when you're trying to sell the business and you have, your 50% customer is refusing to permit the contract to be signed, or they're talking to the buyer and they want to do their own diligence on the deal. Same thing with supplier agreements. You need to be able to assign your contracts to third parties when that time comes, and it's pretty simple to get done. Employment and contractor matters, same thing. Make sure you have assignments. With employment and contractor matters and protection of IP, the most important thing in those areas is to make sure that if you have specific intellectual property, that companies are protecting those. You have confidentiality agreements in place with everybody. If you have trade secrets and they're real trade secrets, you're maintaining those trade secrets in compliance with law, which means they're locked up. They're not freely transmittable to third parties. You don't allow them to be disclosed. You're taking all the precautions you can to protect them, and you're able to sell those trade secrets because that may be the value of your business right there. Along with that, when you're dealing with the contractors and employees, a lot of people don't realize that you always need to have the IP that's developed by your contractors and third parties transferred to you if you are to own that IP. So in other words, if you have a software developer and you don't have in the agreement provisions that transfer the developed software to you as it's developed and at the conclusion of the project, you will be in a situation where you're trying to sell your intellectual property, and unfortunately you won't own it, and it becomes a much bigger problem because then you got to go back to the developer and start to renegotiate with them about those clauses. Some people may be easy and transfer the IP to you, but in other cases they will hold you up for additional consideration. So you need to think about that. In all of your contracts, especially customer agreements and licenses, you always need to think about limitations of liability and indemnification clauses. I've seen many clients that sign agreements and really don't pay attention to those parts of the agreements, and that's where your risk is limited. If you have an agreement that has no cap on liability and there's a problem, you're putting your entire business at risk. And believe me, portfolio companies and private equity firms look at those provisions and measure your risk against those provisions. And so if you've capped your liability in all of those agreements to some dollar amount that is hopefully in all cases subject to you will be handling those risk matters really well, and it really helps to get through those. And finally, on debt and obligations, to know what the payoff terms are. When you enter into a loan agreement or you give personal guarantees, you need to understand what happened. A lot of people, especially in the New York area, sign personal guarantees on leases. And certainly with bank loans, they give personal guarantees on the loans. And so as you're preparing to sell your business, you need to think about what happens to those personal guarantees. 9 times out of 10, they're going to be, the loans are going to be paid off at closing. But if the buyer is assuming a lease, or the buyer is assuming a loan or some other contract where there's a guarantee associated with it, you need to make sure you're being released from those guarantees and relieved of those debts on an ongoing basis. So that, Janine, I think are the high level issues that people need to think about on these matters and prep their businesses for sale.
Thank you, Scott. It's a lot. I think the center, the organized business, and we always tell all of the startups and the growing companies we work with, you've got to be, it's Scout's motto, you've got to be prepared. Even if you're not thinking about this, having an organized business and trying to think about all of the different pieces, getting ready, it will make a big difference. And we'll dive into a lot more of these into a lot more detail, I think, in the session that's on due diligence as well. So thank you, Scott.
You're welcome. Just one point. I know a lot of people who are growing businesses look at the fees associated with this and think, the cost benefit analysis may not be worth it. But even if you're selling a business 3 or 4 years out, you need to start thinking about these issues and covering them off, because agreements run in some cases 2 to 3 years, and all of a sudden you're stuck with something that may not be workable for you.
That's exactly right. Don't take any shortcuts. So that's right. Mary, are there any questions?
No, not yet.
Okay. All right. I'm just going to encourage everybody to keep use the Q&A box and ask your questions. All right. So thank you, Scott. So now we're going to think about one of the other key questions. Now that you think about the business, one of the things that's always on the mind of a seller is, how much is my business worth? What am I going to get from this? And understanding how that's calculated and what goes into that process is really important. And Keith is going to help us to understand that.
Thanks again, Janine. So, the easy answer is, what's a willing seller willing to sell his company for, and what's a buyer willing to pay for it? But obviously, it's more complicated than that. So, the ways to value the business, the most common is what we call in the trade earnings multiple, or EBITDA. Earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. So if you are doing, you add back, you come up with your operating cash flow or profitability, you multiply it times 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9, and that's the multiple, right, that people are willing to pay. When you're looking at family closely held companies, we use the term adjusted EBITDA. And what does that mean? Is, public companies looking to increase their revenues and drive profitability up, so they increase their stock value, where it's not uncommon for business owners to look to drive their profitability down to minimize the taxes. So we have these adjustments, and these adjustments are added back to your earnings to come with adjusted EBITDA. And people that are experienced buyers expect that, especially from family closely held companies. So what are some of those add backs? So it could be normalization of officer salary. So if you're taking out $1 million a year for your business, your replacement is $250,000, you'd add back $750,000. You may have family members on the payroll that don't work there. You would add those back. Certain discretionary items that you would pay personally that go through the business, you would add those back. There could be one-time charges, such as a legal case, dispute with an employee, an environmental concern, things that are not normal running your business, that are one-time charge. You would add that back to come up with adjusted profitability. And that's what you would sell off. That is what you would apply the multiple to. So that is the number one way buyers look and value businesses. Other ways are what we call asset value, and that would be the value of your receivables, your inventory, your property and equipment. But in addition to that, some of the items would be the active value of your customer list, the intangibles, the patents. You may have a patent portfolio that's got a great value. It doesn't show up in your income statement, but that value long term has an incredible value to a potential buyer. You may have licensing agreements in place with some of your products. So the future value of that licensing agreement could be of great interest and great value to a business. That's how you look at it from an asset perspective. Certain companies are based off of revenues. Certainly software companies that are subscription based and you pay an annual fee for over and over, those are trading in the market at a multiple of their revenue. And not just software companies, it could be companies that have a high level of recurring revenue, like a managed service companies. They have annual contracts, multi-year contracts with their customers. They bill them monthly, and they supply a service based on that agreed upon contract. Those type of companies will likely trade off a multiple of their revenue. And finally, one way is what they call the discounted cash flow. And that discounted cash flow is you look at a future stream of your revenue and what's it worth today. So if you have a company that is in the franchising mode or licensing mode, has a long-term future stream of revenues coming in over multi-years, what's that worth today? That would be the determination of a potential way to value a company. Now, there's a number of factors that flow into all these ways of valuing a business. And the devil's in the details, right? Buyers are looking at a company and they're looking at the revenue, the growth in revenues year over year, what their margins are, are they consistent or above industry averages, or are they below the average? That can have an effect on value. If there's customer concentration, if you're doing $20 million a year, you have one client that represents 60% of your business, that's going to affect the value or how you get paid on the value versus someone who has a $20 million business, has multiple customers. No one represents more than 10% of the business. Industry sector, obviously with COVID-19, if you're in medical devices, you're in various industries that are supporting manufacturing, IT services, etc. There's a lot of value in that. If you're in industries that are hospitality or service oriented, you're having a great effect right now into when you're sitting in the marketplace and what the value is going to be. Management team, the team you built, we touched on this earlier. A team that has performed well or exceeded in troubled times, i.e. COVID-19, the buyer's going to look at that as a great asset to them. And it's going to reduce their skepticism in moving the business forward. So by reducing that skepticism, it's going to increase the value of your business because they're going to place a lot of value on your moving forward. And finally, one area is your technology. And I know we've got to move on here, but your systems in place, are they up to date? What's the investment to update those systems to be concurrent with what common business practices are today? And if they're not, if the buyer looks like they got to put $500,000 or $1 million in upgrade their system, that could affect, the worth of the business. I mean, we're just touching on a few factors here, but there's a lot of detail in this that goes beyond the ways of value business that you need to really dig into. It's important to, get down to the details, understand what's driving every aspect of your business because it's going to affect the value in the long term.
Thank you, Keith. I think that's, it's great insight in terms of owners really need to understand their business, both from their strategy and their operational perspective and where it's going so that they can position that and think about all of these factors and how they're going to influence the value and whether it's going to be enough going forward. So thank you. Now, we've talked about the business and we've talked about the owners. As you're building a business, it's like building a family in many ways, and your employees become a key part of the consideration as to what you're doing. And I've even seen situations where what happens to the employees can be a key driver of who the buyer is. And so, Larry, you've just actually gone through this with your own business. Do you want to talk a little bit about, so what about the employees? What does a seller need to think about in terms of their employees?
Thank you, Janine, and I want to thank Markham and everyone involved for this opportunity. But I want to take a step back. When you sell a business, part of the process is to be a bit reflective. You think back and you take stock of what you've accomplished. And then maybe the second thought is, who are the people who helped us get there? The management team, the rank and file, those people out in the field. And who's looking out for them in this process if I'm looking to sell? So we all know how difficult change can be. And this transition, whatever form it might take, as we're hearing Keith and Scott explain, it's going to be have some challenges. So I would advise anyone contemplating selling, whether they're at 2 years out from looking at it, few years out, or they're coming up to it, think of what your legacy opportunity is here, okay? Because it's a chance for you to look out for those who help you create the value that you're selling. And I think one of the first considerations is, what's your role? What's my role? Am I going to stay on? Am I going to stay on as an advisor? Will I be an independent for a year or two? Showing up 5 days a week, then 3, then 1, then disappearing a year or two later? Or am I going to take on a role in the purchaser's company? Which is actually what I did. And there's an adjustment for that too. But I'll tell you that it's well worth thinking about this in advance and discussing it with the people you know you well, and with advisors such as on this panel. So when you think of who stays and who goes and on what terms, you think about the key people. You think about the people who run departments, middle management. You think of the people who report to work every day. And you might start thinking along with HR, how are we going to serve maybe an outplacement function for people who might not fit into the new regime? Are the key people going to be able to stay on? What role will they have? What future will they have? So it's something to give a lot of pre-thought to, and you can't do it all in your head. You really have to speak to others in your position, in your industry. And it comes down to also, we have to keep it confidential. But we're going to get to that when we get to communication. So I want you to think about is, you're going to think about what the culture of the purchasing company is. Is it like mine? Is it something better, something I would aspire to? Is it something where they're going to sell me off for the parts and I've got to communicate that to, an asset sale, right? Got to communicate that to employees at the right time. So you look at things such as the style of the leadership. If it's a family business, how many generations? How are they getting on? How am I going to fit in there? And my people. The locations. Are they purchasing me for my location? Will I be able to operate fairly independently? Sure, there'll be systems and platforms I have to get used to. And then we arrive at the benefit structure, because you're going to find that your employees might be used to something, and now they have to get used to something else. It might be part of a PEO or a HRA program where they're being reimbursed for high deductibles that they won't be reimbursed for any longer, but perhaps the salaries are better. So that brings us down to talk about communication. And within the limits of the NDA and with great clarity, sometimes you have to pay attention to who you're writing to. And sometimes you keep it very personal. Other times you send a blast. But there's a science and an art to communicating with your employees during this process. The last thing you want is for a rumor mill to start. So you have at one end non-confidentiality derailing a deal, right? Because you're in contravention of your agreement. Or you have over-disclosure, and you have employees surfacing, concerns. Some might outright out and leave. Take it as a hint. Oh, the company's going under. The company's being sold. Big change is happening, and we're going to feel those effects negatively. So I think you have to get out in front, and you have to lead, but you wouldn't do it too soon. You do it when you have a good idea as to where you're going with this. Now, sometimes you have those communications within your close coterie of management, and other times it's just yourself, depending on the size. I would say that in a personal service company, you don't want to devalue your multiple by the rumor getting out that you're selling or retiring or going away. Because if you brought all that value to the business and word's out you're leaving, you might not be able to sell in the first instance. So that's how we would try to make a schedule and an idea of a runway. And one really important thing about the employees is it's going to help you decide what type of buyer and ultimately which buyer you choose when you sell. Because love that movie, Other People's Money, with Danny DeVito. I always refer to it. But you've got the Gregory Pecks of the world who care so much about their company. And then you might have a purchaser who's looking to disassemble you. So you've got to take that several layers down into the benefit structure, into your communications, into a roadmap for how you're going to proceed with a sale of your business. So if you have any questions, we're good.
Thank you, Larry. I think this is, great advice. In my experience, when you're going through this, timing is everything, and having the right roadmap, communicating the right things to the right people at the right time is critical for all the reasons you talk about. You don't want to have a deal's never done till it's done, and for a number of reasons. And so you really.
I would just add the last thing that you want to make sure that when you look in the mirror after the deal is done, or hopefully before, that you're doing and did your best. All right. That's what you want to do at the end of the day.
That's right. That's exactly right. So lots of things to consider about, from your own personal, what's going to happen to you personally, all the way through to what's going to happen to your employees. And the idea of the culture, it really it's really critical, because it affects the kinds of questions that you're going to ask when you engage with your buyer, and really trying to dive down, as you said, and then the communications has such an important So thank you, Larry, I think, and you've come from this, from your experience as well. So the last thing is, we talk about selling a business, but the last thing that there's also, are there any other options as you're moving forward? And now that we've talked through all of these. And so, Scott, you want to walk through some of these alternatives to what an owner might have in terms of an option other than an outright sale?
Sure. And I hope you can hear me. Good. So look, on an outright sale, we're always thinking about selling assets for cash or cash and some sort of debt. And, the biggest issue with selling your business, and I think we all sort of forget about this, is everybody looks at the value in the most cases. How much am I going to get? But it's really how much are you going to get after you pay your taxes? And so, there's a lot of other ways to do deals where you may get more in your pocket at the end of the day after doing another structure versus an outright asset sale. Obviously, selling stock gets you capital gains treatment, and that is much better than paying ordinary income on the assets for in a lot of instances. But this all goes back a little bit to what Keith and Larry have both been talking about, which are, what are your goals in selling the business? So if you're looking to retire, some of these don't work because you're going to have ongoing obligations to the business in a lot of instances, and you simply want to get out. So when we look at these, the first one is a merger, where you're trading, typically in a merger, you're trading stock for stock. So you're selling your business, but you're getting another company's stock. And the important thing to think about with getting the other person's stock is not necessarily the value that they're giving to you, but actually doing diligence on the other person's business. Because what you're really doing is you're trading the company you own for the potential of owning another business. And that potential could be worth more in your opinion or less in your opinion. So you need to be able to go through that company's business and look at their financials and look at their projections and make sure that you're comfortable with the company that you're going to own in lieu of your company and the management team you're sort of investing in. So that's one area. The next is an ESOP or a sale to employees. This is a structured transaction where you basically go out, borrow money, sell the business to your employees, and they become the owners of the business. And a lot of times you stay on running the business, but typically what this generates are issues of control and succession within your employee base and how you're ultimately going to get out of the business. You are creating liquidity for yourself, but you're not necessarily walking away from the business. So you need to understand that. Partial sale, investor sell division, it's pretty clear you're selling a part of your business to create liquidity and generate cash for yourself. The same with, I'm sorry, I got a little lost there, but if you bring in a new investor or bring in a new partner, those are effectively the same thing. You're getting cash put into your business, either one, to grow the business and you're willing to give up some of the equity in the business to grow the business, or separately to sell part of your business and take the cash out. Again, this goes back to a little bit about what I was talking about earlier, where if you're bringing in a new partner or you're bringing in a new investor, you need to really be careful about your corporate governance, your shareholders agreements or other related agreements, and your LLC operating agreements and related agreements. Because if you're certainly bringing in a new partner or someone who you don't know that well, and you're starting out with them after running your own business for some period of time, you want to make sure that if there's control issues or other issues, that you're able to resolve those issues in your favor. And a lot of these deals, frankly, go a little bit to the side when you start negotiating dispute resolution provisions and things like that with new people. The other way to deal with trying to monetize your business is either do a joint venture where, again, you're contributing your assets to another entity. With joint ventures, it's a little unclear because there's a big world of joint ventures out there, whether you're actually going to get out of the business or you're going to be responsible for continuing to run the business. And in that instance, in a lot of cases, you may be running part of the business. Your joint venture partner may be running the other part of the business, and you're contributing assets and hoping to sort of like a strategic partnership. You're trying to create better value for yourself over the long haul. Doesn't necessarily mean you've created a liquidity event for yourself, but there is a way to get liquidity out of it. License arrangement is sometimes easier. You have some great IP. You find a company that really wants to market and sell that IP. You give them a license. You allow them to sell and market your IP, and you simply sit back and collect royalties or other payments related to that. It allows you to sort of move away from running the day-to-day operations of your business, but it allows you to continue to monetize your IP and the other important aspects of your business over the long haul. And those are really the simple, the different alternatives. A lot of this goes down to, as I said, what your goals are. Are you wanting to, and picking up on what Keith said, do you want to retire? Do you want to get out of the business? Are you looking for liquidity? What type of liquidity? Are you ready to walk away completely? And all of that needs to be considered with any of these transactions.
Thank you, Scott. Lots to think about. I think thanks all of Larry, Keith, Scott. The ideas and the considerations there's a lot to think through as a seller, and given everybody a great checklist of things to consider and think through, whether they're ready and looking to sell now or in the future. Mary, are there questions that you've seen before we get started on some of the?
I have not seen any questions yet.
Okay. Well, I've got a question. So, have you ever seen, Scott, what happens when you talked about the organized business? How often and how much of an impact is that on the ultimate sale, either in terms of value or in valuation or in terms of timing when that's not ready? Have you ever seen any of those items, sort of buyers kind of bypass any of those items just to get through a deal through quickly, or ignore any of those?
Well, without getting into all of the details of a asset purchase agreement, yeah, if you can't assign an agreement of a key customer, or you can't assign an agreement of a key vendor because they're being difficult, or they simply don't want to do business with your acquirer, you will have a deal blow up. And buyers will walk away, especially, and Keith can talk about this, especially if part of the EBITDA or a great portion of the EBITDA and the value attributable to the EBITDA is tied to one agreement. So, there's definitely that. And buyers sometimes willing to wait to give you that time, but there's definitely deals that I've been involved in where you have an obstinate customer or vendor and the deal just dies because of it.
Keith, anything? Larry, do you want to add anything?
So, to Scott's point, we see this all the time. It really comes down to a couple of things. With who owns the customer relationship? Is it the owner? And if he or she has been dealing with that customer for 10, 20, 30 years, and if they're looking to walk out the door, how's that going to affect the deal, or could it be a deal? Or do they have a team in place that kind of oversees it? And to Scott's point, it's critical with the key customer, especially when you have concentration issues. A customer that's, whether it's 20, 30, 40, 50% of your business, they're going to want to meet with that customer, and they're going to want to get comfortable and validation they're going to continue on with them. And that's whether they sign a new long-term agreement with the business for a future product. They need to get comfortable with that. And if they don't get comfortable with that, they may move forward with the deal, but they're going to structure a back end, a big piece on the back end and payout to make sure that business continues to come in. So that customer relationship and how that's structured within the organization, it really is going to drive the final determination of getting a deal done.
Yes, customers are a very critical part, especially today. Customers are a key part of the valuation in today's, particularly in today's climate. So one other question, I think I'm just also looking at the time before we wind up. Has anything changed in terms of COVID? How has the process evolved, or what can sellers expect because of the pandemic?
I guess I'm going to jump in on that first. What I have seen is people who had been thinking longer term about retirement. This is a factor which can hasten that decision, and it could start the conversations necessary. Now, in the event that you have a personal services, entity, and many of the clients are with that principal, if that principal stays on a while, that helps segue the business to the new entity, right? The client relationship. And it could also help sweeten the deal because the purveyor of those services would be rewarded in that buyout. That's what I see, fellas. You want to add?
So, we're in an environment of what they call shared risk right now. No one knows what's around the corner. So there's a ton of money sitting out there, especially on the private equity side. I mean, I think in June it was like $1.5 trillion looking to do deals. Deals are obviously, they're clamoring for deals because deal volume is down significantly, although it's starting to come back now. And what I mean by shared risk is that, they're willing to pay the multiple that was sitting out there pre-pandemic, but how that's paid, there's going to be some structure. So some piece of that's going to be on an earnout. They may pay us 70% today and then say, 30% over 1, 2, 3 years. So what does that mean to you? It means that likely for business owners, they're going to have to stick with the business during the earnout period to get their full value when they decide to exit. That's a big consideration right now in the marketplace.
Thanks. That's great advice. All right, I see that we're at the top of the hour, so I'm going to give each of you 15 seconds to say, we've given a lot of things for people to think about, for owners to think about as they're going forward and considering this process is now the right time to sell. What is the one piece of advice that you would like to have the audience take away? Keith, let's start with you.
So be prepared. I mean, you're getting phone calls all the day from business owners. Don't pick up the phone. You owe it to yourself to test the market. You built this business over 10, 20, 30, 40 years. You should drive the process your way to sell on your terms. If you let them drive the process, you're at a disadvantage. You don't want to be in that position after all the time.
Great, thanks. Scott?
I echo Keith. I think that the most important thing, we look at it from the same way, but a little bit different. He's looking at value. I'm looking at contractual and risk matters. But yes, be prepared. Make sure that what I spoke about earlier in terms of having your agreements in place and thinking through these issues, that you've addressed them and you're not just sort of kicking them to the back burner and saying, okay, in a couple of years when I'm ready to do this, that's when I'll start thinking about it. Because you also don't know when someone comes out of the blue and makes you a great offer, then you're stuck and you can't react to the offer. So.
All right, Larry, thank you, Scott. Be prepared.
Right, it sounds like something from Lion King, but I'll just say, I agree with my brethren here, but I'm going to say be prepared, but be ready and start early. And some of the best ways to start is just start the conversation. A little messy with your accountant, a little messy with your lawyer, a little messy with people, but start and you will learn so much in that process that should that deal arise, you'll be well on the way to having considered the paramount considerations early. So start early. Don't kick it down the road. You deserve it. Be prepared and ready.
I think that's great advice. Start good housekeeping, be prepared, and start early. It's never too early to have your business ready. And as Scott says, somebody comes up and offers you a great deal. So thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Keith, for all of your insights today. I think we have a great checklist for sellers considering this. I'm going to put up the next the series is coming up. The next session is going to dive into finding the right buyer. We talked a lot about some of the considerations of what you want to look for in a buyer. And so we're going to dive into that on October the 21st. And the link to sign up for that is in the chat box. So thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Mary, for your support and for co-hosting with me today. And I look forward, thank you, to seeing you all at the next session. Thank you all for joining and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Bless you.
Thank you.